Hello, everyone, and happy Thursday. My name is Jamie Hinkle. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Learning and Inclusion Manager at PFLAG National. We're really excited to have you here for something to talk about live. I'm going to be with you in the chat on whichever platform you are using today. We're really excited to have you here. And just like every week, I'm going to bring in Jean Marie Nevada, who's going to lead our conversation.
Hello, Hinkle. How's it going?
It's been a while. I haven't been on the show in quite some time, so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we see each other all the time, but not like this, so it feels a little bit different.
Yeah,
we're like in our ramp up to the holidays. We're really here together to talk about carbohydrates. So
yeah. I'm really excited about a sweet potato dish I'm making next week with goat cheese and candied bacon. So we're in a good spot.
Everything about that sounds good. Well, we will talk to you later, Jamie. Let us know if we have any questions, and thank you so much for getting things started. Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. My pronouns are she and ella. And every single week we get together to talk about something relevant to the LGBTQ and ally community. And this week we are going to be talking about, a lot of issues related to trans inclusion, including some really exciting news that broke very recently. So we base every single one of our conversations on a news article. If you want to read this week's article and questions, you can go to straightforequality.org/discussion series. And this week's article comes from Metro Weekly, written by John Riley, and it was entitled State Department Issues First Gender Neutral U.S. Passport. And let me just read you the lead from this so you have an idea of where we're going. It says that the U.S. Department of State has issued the first official passport with an X gender neutral marker, marking it another development in the Biden administration's attempts to make identity documents more inclusive and accessible to the LGBTQ community, particularly people who identify as non-binary, intersex, or gender nonconforming. So that is a lot to talk about, and it leads us into a whole bunch of other questions and things to discuss as we head towards the National Transgender Day of Remembrance. And for that, I have two of my colleagues here from the National Center for Transgender Equality. So I would like to introduce NCTE's Executive Director, Rodrigo Leitinen. And hello, Rodrigo, how are you? And there's Cy. Hello, Cy, NCTE's national organizer, Cy Smith. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having us. Excited to be here.
Before we get started talking about the story and some of the other questions I had for you, I was wondering if first you can both very quickly tell me about your roles at NCTE and give people a quick snapshot of the work that NCTE does.
Sure. Well, I'm, again, Rodrigo, or Rigo for short. My pronouns are he, him. And I'm the new executive director here. I actually only started as ED 4 months ago. And NCT, really, we work to change policy to make it safer and easier to be trans in the United States today. There are so many barriers that hold transgender people back. And there's so many laws and policies that are barriers to that we think we can do something to lift. We want to make it so that no trans person has to face those kinds of obstacles. So that's what we try to do.
Thank you. And Cy, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with NCTE?
Sure, absolutely. I am Sebastian, or Cy for short. My pronouns are he and him. I am the national organizer at the National Center for Transgender Equality, or NCTE. And my role is really about mobilizing not only our other trans community folks, but our allies and our supporters and the folks that love and care for us about what's going on in policy world and in policy life. And it's really about getting folks excited and mobilized behind this movement towards trans liberation. That's what I do. It's a lot of the work that I do, and it's rewarding work at that.
And I appreciate anything you do to keep us allies educated and engaged, because it's so important that we know the way to actually speak up and be helpful and useful. So I want to talk about this article and about the change that recently was made. So, I mean, working on identity documents is certainly not a new effort in this space. And the article notes that only 11% of people who are trans in a survey said that they had all of their identity documents that accurately reflects who they are. So could you both share a few stories about, well, first of all, tell people what that means, because I don't think people fully understand what a barrier that is. And maybe can you share a couple of examples or stories of how this has shown up in the work that you're both doing?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I would say that, well, what are identity documents? They're things like driver's licenses, state IDs, passports, birth certificates, even school records. Think of all that paperwork you have to turn in when you apply for an apartment or start a new job or enroll your kid in a school. You have to show tons of paperwork, right? We're all used to that. Well, when you're transgender, your paperwork quite likely isn't actually accurately reflecting who you are. You know, I'm a transgender man myself. I've been going by the name Rodrigo for, God, I don't know I came out in 2007, whatever that math is, whatever that number of years. It's been a while, right? But I did not actually have that name on my driver's license for years afterwards because updating your name or your gender marker, so think of that M or F box that we're used to for male or female. In a lot of places now we have the X option that we're talking about a bit today. It can be really expensive to update that information. It can cost literally hundreds of dollars. It can be really complicated to even figure out how in the world to do it. There are a lot of barriers that make it way more burdensome than it needs to be. So that's why so many trans people, we still haven't been able to update all of our documents. And most of us have one or two things updated, but not everything. And you can imagine the stress that that costs when you're starting that new job, when you're applying at that apartment, when you're enrolling your kid in school and you have to provide proof of parenthood. These are really, really critical moments in your life. It is stressful, if not outright inviting discrimination and violence, for you to have to out yourself as trans and not be able to accurately show who you are.
Yeah. And Sai, what kind of stories have you heard from people about this? Because you're organizing, so I'm sure you are very much on the front lines listening to what people are experiencing. Because I think sometimes when we talk about this in the abstract, we say, you know, ID documents, people don't always connect the dots to the point that Rodrigo was just making. So what kind of things have you heard in your work about this?
Sure, absolutely. So I think Rigo highlighted something that all of us as human beings should think about when we're talking about ID documents. How many situations do you have to provide your ID in? Or do you have to provide identity documents in? Trans people are also in those same exact situations. I too am an openly transgender person, assigned female at birth. Just had a doctor's appointment today. If my doctor was not in affirming space, think about the anxiety I would have walking into that building. And I'm one of those people that have some documents changed and some not because of the systems that are around me. And I do this work, right? And if I'm doing this work and I am having issues navigating those systems, think about the people on the grassroots level, what kind of issues they are having. You know, so if I were at a doctor's office today that was not affirming, there's so much anxiety around that, providing my insurance card and my license and all of these things, but me not showing up looking how folks think I should look based upon this little piece of identity paper, right? But we know it's so important to navigate the many systems in our lives. Trans people cannot be gainfully employed if they don't have documents, because we need bank accounts for our checks to go in. Yeah. So there's another place that you have to show documents at. You know, in some places, even to get public assistance, you have to have some form of documentation, right? So these are the things that I'm helping people down, you know, trans and non-binary people at the grassroots, local and state levels navigate through, because we all know every state has a different law too, right? Has a different process, has different, you know, things that we have to do. I live here in Georgia, but I'm originally from Mississippi. So think about having to go back to Mississippi and talk about being trans. A place that's so far behind so many other issues that they haven't even made it to trans yet. But I'm not the only person having that issue. So again, it's just it's that trickle down effect that, you know, those of us that have had the privilege to change the documents, we cannot forget about that those of us that don't have that privilege and still trying to navigate life though.
Yeah, and I think the more points that people talk about where those ID documents are so critical, the more maddening the problem becomes, because you start to think, well, you can't really get a job, you can't get an apartment, and it spirals. And I think the more people understand the scope of the impact from this, the more damaging it is. So I actually have a question about this. that always really bothers me, which is, why do you think this took so long? I mean, is it purely political resistance? Is it that you think people don't understand? Is it a combination of both? What's going on behind the scenes? Because this certainly, I mean, I've been doing this work for a while. This certainly isn't a new conversation. What happened took a ton of activism and advocacy from lots of people over many years.
I think that, Rigo, if you don't mind me jumping out there, I think that it's a combination of all of them. I think that it took a certain amount of visibility for not only those of us that are trans identified to stand up and say, hey, this is something that we needed, and also speak for a community of folks who are silenced. There's so many of us that are in rural neighborhoods, rural areas, poverty stricken. But there are also trans people too that don't have those voices to speak up and say, hey, this is something that I need. So I think for many years, a lot of us just kept our heads down. Like, I'm just going to keep my head down, live day to day. If I cannot do these things, I'm just going to get over it. And so many of us have lived that I'm going to just get over it existence for so long that it's become so detrimental to our mental health. So I think that, of course, like I said, it's a combination of all those things: the education, the systems that we're navigating in as Black and brown people, because I'm a Black person first, and I want to be honest and transparent about that. Before anybody knows my transness, they can see my Blackness. So I have to navigate Blackness first before I can even get to transness. So that's some issues. All of our issues are so intersectional and so compound and so overlapping that it took some digging down into those issues to pull out those things that we know that are extremely important. So it's a combination of things, but I think there are so many great organizations now in 2021 and before now, really in the past, I'm willing to say maybe 10 to 15 years that have really stood up and been visible, like NCTE and other orgs, and say, this is what we need. And I think that is what has really started to change things.
And I have to say, on the ally side of things, I'm so grateful to people like you, people who are doing this work, who are telling these stories, because I think sometimes in the absence of those personal connections, in the absence of knowing the real impact, people didn't quite understand the full scope of the stories. Just saying it's the right thing to do wasn't enough for some people. But I think when you realize this is happening to my son, this is happening to my sister, this is happening to my brother, this is happening to my best friend, I think it has made a lot more people aware of this. So one of the things I thought was really interesting in this article, and I've noticed this popping up in several articles, and we actually did a show on this a couple of weeks ago. It mentioned that the plaintiff in the case that led to this big change is both trans and intersex identified. So we are seeing, well, these are obviously not the same thing. Many of the issues are very shared. Rodrigo, could you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm not sure everybody fully understands sort of the outlines of that piece of the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, first, just some basic definitions so we're all on the same page. Being non-binary means identifying with some kind of gender outside of man, woman, male or female. And now for some people, that means identifying kind of in the middle. If you think of being a man and a woman as ends of a spectrum, some people feel like they're in the middle. Some people don't identify with the whole thing at all. They're like, I'm not on that spectrum. I exist outside that system. So it can mean different things to different people, but being non-binary means not being a man or a woman, not identifying as a boy or a girl in the case of youth, somehow existing in a different way or identifying in a different place. Some non-binary people are also transgender. Some non-binary people are not. And generally, the most important thing to know, if you know someone who is non-binary, if they share that with you, just ask them, how do you want me to refer to you? What are your pronouns? How do you want me to talk about you? That's really all you need to know, right? That's the most important thing. And then they can share more beyond that if they are comfortable. Being intersex, though, is a medical thing. It is a big category to encompass all sorts of different medical conditions that can mean that someone is outside of those extremes of male and female. So again, it's purely a medical thing. The most important thing to know about being intersex is that although it might sound unusual, it's actually, there's nothing unhealthy about it. It is not actually a problem. The problem is the stigma. The problem is the discrimination. The problem is the assumptions people put, non-intersex people put on intersex people. But medically, it's actually totally healthy and in fact, normal. In this case with the passports, big credit to the bravery and leadership of Dana Zim, who did this lawsuit and really pushed and pushed and pushed on behalf of all of our communities. Now, what it means is that people can get an X marker on their passport. And you could choose that to use that X in place of male or female, M or F, whether you identify as non-binary, and or you are intersex, and or you actually just don't want to share your gender. You actually are allowed to pick it if you're just like, I don't want to give that information. There's not restrictions on it, which is fantastic. Anyone can opt into that. So yeah, now people will be able to get that X gender marker starting early next year, which is amazing.
It really is. It's really exciting. And that it's not a hidden process anymore. People will now be able to fully understand exactly what they need to do. And hopefully, although I want to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff going on, this will lead to some other positive changes. So what I already gushed about this prior to the show. So for anybody who knows me, I am a research junkie. I can't get enough information about research. I just completely am addicted to it. And one of my very favorite things is the National Transgender Survey that NCTE does. We learn that knowledge is power as kids, but I swear like that particular survey is straight up wizardry. It's so important. The data is so good. But we know that the last version came out several years ago. So could you both tell me a little bit about what is happening next and what opportunity people have right now?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Getting excited. We're all excited about the data and the numbers because it's time to update that data. So excited. So yes, the USTS 2022 is right now we're in the pledge period. So if you know any folks out there, any of our folks out there in the audience, if you know any trans or non-binary people, the link is running down below there. So make sure you provide them with the link and they can pledge today to take the US Trans Survey when we release it in 2022. Now, let me be really clear about what the pledge period is for, so folks are very clear about that. Our outreach tactics this go around, was to really prioritize some of those groups that we missed out on 2015. Our BIPOC community, our rural folks, our indigenous folks, Spanish speakers, disabled folks, all those priority groups that we missed out on 2015. Our outreach tactics this year are definitely targeting those folks. So once those pledges are coming in, we are going to review those pledges and see what demographics are we getting. Are we getting enough of our Black respondents, our Black trans folks? Oh shoot, we're not. So let's go back. Let's go back to the drawing board and see what we need to do to outreach to that specific group. We figure out we don't have enough of our indigenous folks. Let's do that early. Let's do that stuff early in the game. So when it's fielding period next year, we have already done so much outreach and talked to so many different priority groups that they're just as excited as we are about this new data, and we can make sure that we're targeting those folks specifically. So that's what we're doing with the pledge period, and that's why it's so extremely important. We got about 28,000 respondents last go around, and we want to try to keep it out there and keep it popular in that way, and keep those numbers going, because we know this information informs the policy work that all of us do. It informs our educators. It informs our lecturers. It informs us that do cultural. I'm taking sensitivity out of there because we got to move from 101 to 102.
Amen to that.
That's another session. So I'm going to take sensitivity out of that. So we got to do, when you're doing your cultural competency, when you're talking about trans and non-binary lives, this is where you pull that data from, because it gives you a broad scope of so many of the experiences that trans and non-binary people are going through. So this data is going to be huge and amazing and so great for all of us. And then it's also going to be inclusive of 2 years of a pandemic, right? We have to make sure we talk about that, because that one of those years is on the records as one of the most deadliest years for Black trans people. Yeah. So we got to figure that out. We have to.
Which actually, unfortunately, cues up another question that I was thinking about today, which is all of this really good work is happening at a time when we are seeing more anti-trans legislation than probably ever before. I mean, I think the last number we were over 150 pieces of legislation in, I think it was 33 states, some of which has become law. Rigo, What is going on out there? I mean, is this a very unified, concerted effort? Is this just sort of a groundswell? And, what is NCTE doing around some of these issues?
Well, we're seeing so many attacks on transgender people and really transgender youth. It is even more narrow. They are going after transgender young people because they are losing on LGBTQ rights elsewhere. And so, really, what's happening here is the opposition, meaning anti-LGBTQ groups, are going, we lost on marriage. We lost on those trans bathroom bans. We're losing public support. More and more people are accepting their LGBTQ family. How do we stop that? And you know what? These opposition groups have decided that they are going to turn the tide by going after transgender youth. They have picked some of the most marginalized people in our community and put a target on their backs to try to score some political points. So that is why we are seeing this sudden uptick in bills banning transgender, or at least attempting to ban transgender young people from sports, and attempting to ban transgender young people from even accessing gender affirming healthcare. But the really important thing to take away from this is the opposition is doing this because we are winning, because we are actually making inroads, and more people are coming to support us. More and more people like all of you tuning in tonight or today, depending on what time zone you're in, are really coming to accept your LGBTQ family, including trans family. So we are gonna win this. We are gonna beat these bills back, and we are gonna win in the long run. But the thing is, we have to keep fighting. We are gonna make it if we keep showing up and showing out. And we're gonna be counting on all of you tuning in to do that early next year, because we are gonna face just as many of these attacks on our transgender youth in all these state legislatures early next year all over again. So get ready to contact your state reps, get ready to contact your state senators. Do not assume that you don't have to worry about it, that the bills are going to fail. Don't take it for granted. Get ready to call your reps and your senators.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can I please just ask one question? How does the Equality Act tie into some of this?
Sure. Well, the Equality Act, for me as a trans person, right, it's ensuring that I'm safe from discrimination in public areas. It's ensuring that when I go out into the world, into society, and in using any public accommodation, that because of my gender identity, I will not be discriminated against. And it's so important that we all, in these pieces of legislation, I ask people to find commonality, find that thing that hits home for you. If you're a cisgender Black female, there's something in the Equality Act that protects you too. This is not just an LGBTQ plus bill when we're talking about the Equality Act. This is a people's, this is a people's bill. And what I always try to do is attach humanistic qualities to some of this stuff. I'm a human being too. I might just happen to be trans, but I'm also a human being. And in that way, and we start to find commonality in those things, then you can more understand some of the struggles of us marginalized folks, because they're overlapping, as I mentioned before. But the Equality Act is so important to so many disenfranchised folks, not just trans folks, not just LGBTQ folks, but cis folks, religious folks. It's so much in there for all of us. So it definitely all ties in.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So you sort of brought me exactly to where I wanted to spend the rest of our time talking, which is, what do we do about this? Because, everybody talks about allyship. It's one of the biggest terms that we keep hearing buzzing around. We are approaching National Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is going to be an incredibly solemn observation, as it is every year, although this year we're going to see even more names read, probably, and all those names that we don't know of because they weren't properly reported. Globally, I think the number has been, I just read a report the other day that said somewhere around 375 known murders this year globally. So first of all, what should allies be doing for Transgender Day of Remembrance? What is the role of allies at these observances? Because I think people are often looking for, how do I stand in solidarity but not take the space?
Absolutely. One of the first thing I would do is kind of go back to what Rigo did earlier is talk about a definition, right? Let's define what allies are and what allyship is. For me, it's not just supporting. It's not just saying, yeah, I'm okay with trans people, but it's taking an action, right? It's taking a tangible action. Even if that's like we were talking about the Equality Act, even if that's writing a letter to your senators, that's an action. That's an active action. If you know of in your city or state that there are groups, trans groups, that are equality groups that are doing this work, tap into what they're doing. See what they're doing because there's space for all of us. While I understand we don't want to take up space that belongs to certain groups, right? But we also want to make sure we show up for those groups and be visible for those groups as well. And the only way to do that is to tap into your local groups, tap into what's going on around you. Just about all of our states have equality groups, and all of those equality groups are connected to trans groups. We want to also start before I send it over to my co-partner here. I want to also say that we want to start changing the narrative around TDOR. The murders, bringing attention to it, yes, we have to. But let's start talking about the resilience of a group of people who get continuously attacked. Continuously attacked. There's some resilience there for folks like Rigo and myself that we continue to show up each and every day and continue to fight each and every day. And I hate to be so somber, when any day Rigo or myself could walk out of our houses and our names could be on the list. So there's the person behind all of these movements. There's people behind all of these movements.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. So I would just to add on super briefly of concrete things people can do. Number one, like Sai said, call your senator in support of the Equality Act. That is a federal piece of legislation. So that's your U.S. senator. Everybody's got one if you live in a state. You don't if you live in a territory, which is a whole other political issue, but like DC. But if you live in a state, you got two senators. Call them both, write both of them letters. Number two, look up those trans organizations in your community, like Sai was saying, and donate. That's a fantastic way to show support, especially on Trans Day of Remembrance. It is a tangible, concrete thing you can do. And there is no such thing as a donation that is too small because, yes, it is financially significant, but it is also emotionally significant. It's a way of showing support, especially for you as a community member, someone on the ground there. And number three, check out NCTE's website. Sign up to get our action alerts because then when it's state legislative session again, if you live in a state that faces one of these bad bills, we will send you an action alert. We will let you know. So you can sign up for action alerts on our website, transequality.org, scrolling down there in magic technology. And lastly, number four, check out our website for that kind of basic trans information, just what it means to be trans and what it means to be non-binary, and send that to somebody in your life if you have a family member who's not an ally yet. The holidays are a perfect time for this, right? We all know we get together with some people, maybe some family over the holidays, and maybe we don't agree, and maybe they got some problematic views, and you can be like, here's a link, or you can use that language. It gives you some really basic talking points for more accurately describing what it means to be transgender and what are the issues that we face. So those can be helpful resources for navigating those conversations.
I just want to be like, pass the stuffing. I find your views odious. Clearly, I'm extending the piece here. I think there are so many things that we can do. And I think one of the biggest things, I so appreciate you say, just learn the basic language so that way you can educate people. And I really want to encourage people, check out NCTE's website because there are so many resources up there too and stories. Because I know as somebody who teaches, I hear people say to me all the time, I've never met anyone who's trans. I'm like, first of all, you have. You just
didn't know.
Let's just stop right there on that. But I'm like, and if you think you haven't, it's not like you can't find people's stories. And I find these stories to be so profound and the work that people like both of you are doing so absolutely critical. I am incredibly honored that you are here and so proud of the work that's happening and really hoping that everybody who's watching is going to help get the word out about the survey. Take that pledge so we can get people into that survey. And please, Rigo, Sai, if there's anything that you ever want to come back about and talk about and teach people about, we would love to have you back here again sometime. So thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we'll be back for sure.
Excellent. Yeah. Good. We're going to make it a date. Thank you so much. Well, everybody, we are just about at time. Ooh, 9 seconds to go. All right, so that was a really important show. Make sure you check out the resources from National Center for Transgender Equality. If you know somebody who's trans or non-binary, please ask them to take that pledge. We are going to be off next week so that way I can stuff my face full of stuffing. But then we will be back the following week with another fantastic show for you. Please have a safe holiday. We wrap up the same way every single week, which is reminding you to run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, be kind. And please, 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 if you haven't done it yet, get vaccinated. And if you're eligible, go get your booster shot because we all want to be able to hug in person really soon. My name is Jean Marie Navetta. I'll be back in 2 weeks for more something to talk about. In the meantime, if you need help, please visit pflag.org/find to locate your closest chapter. Thanks, everybody, and see you soon.